in the spirit of me revealing that my dad died the other day, I figured I would tell you guys a little bit about him. When I was a teenager, my dad beat me so badly one night that I couldn't sit down, and my parents kept me home from school that day. And that was my very last day in public school. They homeschooled me after that. Not only did they homeschool me, but they completely isolated me socially from everybody. A therapist told them to do something called Siberia. This therapist was old friends with my dad from when they were in school together. Siberia involved locking me in my room and taking away my computer, my internet, my anything at all for 4 years. I sat in that room alone with nothing but books. I had some books. One of those books was titled Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card, and the sequel to it, Speaker for the Dead. I don't feel like the term eulogy is appropriate for my dad. I don't intend to eulogize him because that involves praising the person, speaking highly of him, when, in all honesty, he wasn't a good person. So I'm not going to eulogize him, but I will speak for the dead, and I will tell his story, good and bad, because nobody is two-dimensional. He had good qualities and bad qualities. When I was a little bit younger, I think I was probably 10, 11, 12. I was just a little kid. I actually had a pretty decent relationship with him. He got in a car accident when I was like 7 or 8 years old, and from that point on, was in a wheelchair. So my relationship with him was pretty good at that age. I remember sitting in his room with him while my mom was at work, because remember, he's wheelchair bound. So my mom was kind of supporting us on basically a minimum wage salary, or minimum wage hourly pay. He and I would like throw things into the ceiling fan. We had this little kind of gummy, one of those hands you throw at a wall and it sticks and then you pull it off the wall. We would throw it into the ceiling fan and watch it spin around and fly at the wall, and I would grab it and we'd throw it back in. I mean, he was a pretty cool person to be around for that time. He was really good to me, actually. And I guess that kind of got under my mom's skin because that whole facade that he put up for me was actually a lie. He was actually terribly abusive to my mom. Terribly abusive. So one night, she had a fight with my dad, and I don't know whose fault it was, but he tends to get physically and mentally abusive, so I'm kind of leaning on the side of it was his fault. She left him behind, and she left me behind too. And when she came back to pick me up the next day, I didn't want her to take me because it seemed to me, as like a 10-year-old or whatever, that it was her fault. That's what it looked like at the time, without having enough information. So I didn't go with her. Eventually, the elders in our congregation told her she had to come back to him. She had to live with him because he's the head of the household and all of that shit, despite the abusiveness. So she did. She came back. This happened 6, 7, 8 times throughout the course of the next, 8 years. It happened constantly, basically every 6 months. She'd leave him. I'd usually go with her. The elders would tell her to move back in with him, and we would. We lived in low-income housing, like rent-controlled Section 8 housing, every time we left him. And then the elders told us to move back a couple weeks or a month or sometimes 2 months later, and we would. Eventually, after that very first time that she moved out and then came back, my mom started working on showing me who the guy really was, trying to break that facade. Over time, as he started to realize that the facade was gone, that I realized who he actually was, that he really was kind of a monstrous, evil person, he started to target me with the abusiveness rather than my mom. Every single sibling that I have, 3 of them. The moment they turned 18 years old, they left the state. They moved out. They didn't want anything to do with my dad particularly. But when my last brother moved out, that meant that it was just me and my dad alone, just us. And that gave him the opportunity to target me with the abuse. My mom was working this hourly job trying to support us, and while she was at work, I was supposed to be homeschooling for 4 years again. And my dad had this thing called intermittent explosive disorder, IED. And it's basically where he just completely loses his fucking mind, just explodes with violent behavior out of nowhere for no reason. I remember running down the hall and running into my bedroom and shutting the door behind me and pushing a shelf in front of it with him banging on the door, trying to kick it open to get to me. I literally have post-traumatic stress disorder from that kind of experience. And I dealt with a solid 4 years of that. Not just dealing with him doing that, but having nobody else in the entire world that I knew. Nobody. Being around nobody else. Having no friends, no family, no contact with the outside world at all. And dealing with that. Throughout all of this, he did his best to crush my confidence in favor of his own. He wanted to crush my soul to the best of his ability. He would do things like tell me to sit down, and when I sit down, he'd tell me to stand up again immediately. Sit down, stand up, sit down, stand up. And if I didn't, he would beat the shit out of me. I had to follow his instructions without question. He would stare me down, look right directly into my eyes for 2 or 3 minutes until I looked away. I was always the first one to look away. He was the person that did his best to break me down and build me back up in his image, or just leave me broken, whichever one worked for him. My dad didn't have a great childhood either. He had a terrible fucking childhood. First of all, he was when he was little. That's information that he didn't give to us until way later. Luckily, that never happened to me or my brothers or anything like that, so that's a plus. He didn't carry on that cycle of abuse. So, I guess he gets a thumbs up for that one. But his relationship with his family was very tenuous. He did have, like, brothers and sisters and a father, my grandfather, who came to West Virginia from time to time to hang out with us and see us or whatever, mow the lawn at their farm, and then they'd go back up to Michigan. Well, one day, my dad and my 2 brothers went over to the farm to see them because they were in town. And I guess things took a turn for the worse. My dad got in an argument with my grandfather, and one of them picked up a piece of molding that goes along a wall. I think my grandpa picked it up, and it had nails in it. He started hitting my dad with it. So my dad punched my grandfather. Then my uncle comes in. He's been in the military for 30 years. You know, long-time veteran. So he comes in, just sees my dad punch my grandfather. He runs up to my dad and punches him in the face. Again, the guy was in the military for 30 years. He punched my dad in the eye so hard, it crushed the entire eye socket. My dad's eye was literally hanging out of his head. They end up getting my dad to the car so they can go to the hospital, and my uncle was like apologizing and said he just reacted and he, didn't mean to do that, and he and my dad were on good terms for a while there after that. But my dad goes to the hospital and gets like mesh plating like installed under his eye to like kind of keep his eye in place or whatever, But after that, he would just kind of zone out of nowhere. Like he would be talking and then just his mind's gone. There's just nothing behind his eyes, just sitting there. Like staring into space, no responsiveness, no nothing. It didn't happen terribly often, but it happened a few times. after that incident. That contributed heavily to my dad's Munchausen syndrome, which was a huge problem in our lives. It turns out my dad had Munchausen syndrome. He wanted people to think that he was sick or that he's sicker than he was. Years later, after all of this played out, I think I was maybe 20 years old, 19 or 20. My dad walked into the living room. Again, remember, he's supposed to be in a wheelchair. He stands up out of his wheelchair and walks into the living room and says, "I've been lying to you guys and myself for 11 years. I can actually walk." All of those years of him ordering me to do things. Stand up, sit down, stand up, sit down. Telling me he's not well enough, not capable of cooking for himself, of getting his own water. Literally just picking up a glass and shaking it so the ice makes a noise, so that I'll run in and grab him water and bring it back to him. All of those years of cleaning up after him and taking care of him. And he was lying about it the entire fucking time. Basically everything the dude ever said was a lie. It's like trying to figure out an enigma, a fucking puzzle. I have no idea what he really believed and what he didn't. After my mom finally left him, like years and years later, like 10 years ago she left him, I think. She split up with him, separated permanently, and ignored the elders this time. He left Jehovah's Witnesses behind. After being in it for like 25, 30 years, he left it behind. He just kind of just walked away. Just stopped going to the meetings, stopped even trying to pretend anymore. And then he emailed me probably 5 years ago and told me he's an atheist. And he always has been. What? He was in this religion for like 25 fucking years and he was an atheist the whole time? The guy is a social chameleon. He takes on the characteristics that he thinks his audience wants him to have. It's probably another one of those mental disorders that he had that we just never figured out. He's been to an army of therapists throughout his life. 10, 15, fucking 20 therapists at one point in his life. And they couldn't figure the dude out. I don't know what was real and what wasn't with him. What was genuine about what he believed or what he thought or how he felt. I don't know. I think the guy was a sociopath, actually. I strongly suspect the guy was a sociopath because just all of the decisions that he's made throughout his life point to caring about him and nothing else. Nobody else. To his credit, he does have good qualities, so I haven't covered the good qualities much, but there were some. He seemed to be willing to defend and protect his kids to the death. He seemed willing to protect us no matter what. A long time ago, you guys know I'm an addict. I've talked about that before, or I'm an ex-addict. I used to be an addict, and I got into legal trouble at one point. And he actually did everything he could to get me out of jail, to, put up bail, to pay for a lawyer, whatever it was. When my mom went full shun mode, decided not to talk to me anymore, I get a phone call from her 3 days later, when this originally first happened. And she said, "Your dad is sitting here crying because he can't talk to you. And he wants you to just come over and hang out for a bit." So I did. My dad never shunned me. Like, not once. I mean, there were some good qualities to the guy. They were just few and far between. He used to do things like, after I had Kylie, since he wasn't shunning me, I came over to my parents' house, and my mom would be in the other room shunning me. And my dad would actually take Kylie and put her on his wheelchair. He had this electric wheelchair. This is before he admitted that he was lying. He'd put her on, the foot plate to it and just, drive her up and down the hallway. She'd be sitting there laughing and having fun. He'd be playing with her and everything. The guy seemed to care about his kids and his grandkids. Seemed to. But that contradicts everything that I know about him. That contradicts the idea that he really is a sociopath, which I strongly genuinely suspect. I don't fucking know. He's an enigma. He's always been an enigma from day one. Like, impossible to figure out. Eventually, my mom did end up leaving him. She moved out. She left. She moved to Connecticut, back to Connecticut with her family. And I was broke as shit. So the house was separated into two sections. There was an upstairs and there was a downstairs. And the downstairs had basically full living facilities. It had a bathroom and a kitchen and 2 bedrooms and a family room. It was a nice little space. So my dad asked me to move down there with him. So I lived in the downstairs, my dad lived in the upstairs, and we never had to cross paths, really. Unless he needed something or unless we wanted to. I had the option of locking that door and never dealing with him if I didn't want to. That was a plus. Well, one day, this happened about once every 6 weeks. He'd just completely lose his shit, and he'd have one of those intermittent explosive disorder episodes where he would lose it and get in this massive fight with me over something that was just fucking nonsense. I mean, these fights literally led to scars on my fists from defending myself. He would just lose his shit every 6 weeks, consistently for my entire life. So one day I'm staying downstairs in my little apartment there, for which I was paying him rent. I was paying rent there. And he didn't want me there anymore, so he called the cops on me and told them that he wanted me out, nonsensically. I mean, I have a kid. I have like a 2-year-old kid with me at that point. And so the cop comes there. I show him like rent receipts, and the cop just said, I don't even care. If he wants you out, then you have to get out. Like, renters' rights don't matter at all, I guess. So my dad had power over me once again in that moment. Crushed my confidence once again. It was just like the days when I was sitting there behind the shelf inside my bedroom, pushing up against it desperately, trying to prevent him from busting the door down and beating my ass all over again. After that incident happened, I never talked to my dad again. I was completely 100% done with him. After all the shit that he put me through as a kid, after everything, after doing his absolute best to crush my confidence, to crush my soul, to crush my body, I was done with him. I didn't want anything to do with him at that point. I think I was 22 maybe. So I left and I never looked back. I never talked to him again. I think 5 years ago he moved to Pennsylvania, to Butler, Pennsylvania. And then 3 years ago, we found out, maybe 2 years ago, we found out, me and my brothers and my sister, that he was found wandering the streets of Butler, Pennsylvania, aimlessly. He had shit and pissed himself and was not responding to commands. The cops showed up and they were like talking to him, waving their hand in front of his face, and he was just that blank stare again. They took him to the hospital and tried to treat him for something. I don't even know now. But they'd put their hand in his and they'd say, can you squeeze my hand? And nothing. It was just blank, just gone. His head was gone. I think a week after that, or maybe it was just a few days, he finally came back to reality. He started coming back to it and trying to figure things out and started talking again and went back to this little trailer that he rents. And he seemed to be okay again. But after that, he tried desperately to reconnect with us kids, and told us when he gets older, he's going to need somewhere to stay. He needs somebody to stay with and somebody to be around. I was more than willing to pay money toward putting him in like a nursing home or an assisted living home or something. I will help. I'll pay for some of this. But he's not living with me. He didn't want that. He didn't want an assisted living facility. He didn't want a nursing home. I think because they wouldn't allow him to smoke weed or drink alcohol. That's my suspicion. Which he didn't start doing again until about 10 years ago or something, after I left. But I wasn't going to let him live with me or around my daughter or my family after everything that he'd done to me. He did not deserve that. So I was willing to help him and put him in an assisted living facility, but I wasn't going to have him near my family or me. When I was growing up, the dude was actually 450, 500 pounds. He's fucking gigantic. He's very, very, very large. He's a physically large, intimidating person. He's also like 6'5" or something. I don't know. He's really fucking tall. At least he seemed that tall to me when I was younger. Which makes it even worse when I'm just this tiny little kid, you know? Just this little teenage kid that's naturally thin anyways. I mean, he could just pick me up and throw me like a fucking rag doll, which he's done. You know, he was coming after me one time, and my mom stepped in front of him to stop him from, like, attacking me. And he just put his hand on her and pushed her to the side like a fucking rag doll, knocked her on the floor, flat on her ass, and came after me and grabbed me by the throat and started hitting me anyway. When he set his mind to something, there was nothing anybody could do to stop him. All you could do was run. That's it. You could just run and hide. After he moved out on his own and lived in his trailer with no one else around, he lost 200 pounds because he couldn't take care of himself. Like, he couldn't make his own food. He couldn't cook. Dude couldn't fucking cook. And he lost all this weight because of it. It turns out, he's completely incompetent. Incapable of taking care of himself, and he always has been. This is not a recent thing. My mom did all of the cooking, or I did. My mom brought in the money. My mom did all of it. My mom would talk to landlords to rent apartments. She did everything. My dad was so completely incompetent from day one. He was incapable of even feeding himself. I have no idea how he made it through life. Anyways, that's my dad's story. Like I said, I had no intentions of eulogizing him. I wanted to speak for the dead. I wanted to tell his story. Nobody is two-dimensional. You've only heard the bad parts for the most part. There were good parts in this. He had good qualities. And sometimes they showed. He was an atheist, I think. He was also a Trump supporter, I think. He voted for Trump anyways. And he was also a terrible alcoholic. Those are probably the three things that I'll remember about him. My mourning mostly focuses around wishing that he had been a better person than he was. And wishing that he had more good qualities than he did. Or maybe showing those good qualities more often than he showed the bad ones. I'm sorry that he's dead. I wish that it hadn't played out that way. And I'm not sure that I'm really happy with the fact that I didn't talk to him for 10 years. Here are the last messages I got from him. June 28th, 2020. Hey kiddo, seen your YouTube video about JW Main Branch. Loved it. You've got big brass balls. July 29th, 2020. You still mad at me? August 6th, 2020. Hey, talk to me, Turkey. January 28th, 2021. Hey. February 4th, 2021. Why the fuck don't you talk to me? The last words he ever spoke to me. That's it. I don't know what the guy wanted. I don't know what was in his head. He was an enigma. I don't know how to figure him out, really. I have no fucking clue. But I know what I would want. And that's to be remembered. When I die, I want people to remember me. They say you die once when your body stops functioning, and you die a second time when somebody speaks your name for the last time. I want to be remembered. So, in my own way, I am immortalizing him by making this video about him, by talking about him, by telling his story. He will forever be a footnote on some Wikipedia page about me. So for what it's worth, you're immortalized. People will remember you now, Dad. If you wanted people to remember you better, maybe try being a better person. Anyway. Alright, I'll tell you what, that was pretty sad. I'm sorry I drug you guys down that sad little thing there. I have other family members who have one foot in the grave and one on a banana peel right now, a little tenuous, kind of touch and go, hoping for the best with them because they never wronged me, the others. Not really. So, my grandfather is in rough shape at the moment, my mom's dad, and we're a little worried he's not going to make it through the rest of the year. And other family members are kind of rough. So it's probably going to be a little bit of a rough year for us, but that's the only eulogy that I felt was necessary. The other people can stand on their own merits. My dad could not because he didn't have many. None of your business. Sorry your dad was like that. I know it really sucks to have narcissistic parent. My mom is the same. It does suck. Yeah, he definitely had narcissism also. There's some real fucked up things about my dad. I don't know what was wrong with his brain, but something was very wrong with him. I have PTSD now because of him, and my mom used to play the violin long time ago when I was little, and now every time I hear a violin played in a specific way, quietly, it sends me into flashbacks. Terrible flashbacks. Blood on the walls, shells being pulled down, phone cords being ripped out. I mean, specifically those things is what those flashbacks are. Hardcore introvert. I hope you know that if you want to be remembered fondly by others when you die, you are on the right path. You seem to be a good person. I appreciate it. I do my best to do the right thing in every situation. My focus is doing the moral thing. Our ideas of moral may differ, but you can depend on the fact that I will always do what I think is right, always. And if you don't think that I'm making the right decision, you just have to make a moral argument to convince me that another decision is the more moral one. That's it. All of the shit that I just talked about, it's old shit, man. That stuff happened to me 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, in some cases. It's over, Guy's dead. I don't have to think about it. I don't have to worry about it. He paid his price. He's in the grave, and he's so unliked. He's not even getting a funeral. We're not even giving him a funeral. We're cremating him and spreading the ashes out somewhere in West Virginia. That's it. And we aren't even all going to be there. It's only one of us going to be spreading the ashes. Nobody's two-dimensional. Everybody has good qualities and bad. But his bad qualities so outweighed the good that he's not even being given a funeral.